Alright folks, welcome to this exciting video where you once again join me in the wild landscape of Scotland, and for this adventure I've come to document a forgotten ancient Scottish settlement, and it's hidden here within this wild land. The land here originally carved from the melting of the glaciers, and even the glaciers themselves. A lot of this finer debris here was deposited at the end of that time, and then after that covered with years of vegetation, and that's what shaped these mega mountains and hills all around me here in Glen Clova. And this is a forgotten little settlement that I did visit one time a couple of years ago with the channel DJ when we were out on a previous adventure, and I just thought it's just about sunset, and how cool would it be just to come for a quick adventure here, because I just love exploring history and seeing things that's like almost forgotten. Some of these old settlements is from such a long time ago that it's almost like incomprehensible, if that's even a word. I can see there's also like a misty fog. I can see in the bottom of the valley today there's a misty fog right there, and I can see remains of a first building here that I'm wanting to check out. I'm going to have to be super careful because this area here is just super wet. I should maybe come back to this building after. I could start by going across to these little buildings, folks. I'm just reading the land and exploring the terrain. It's amazing at this time of year how all the vegetation and stuff starts to die back, and this is like a grazing land for cows and sheep most commonly. But the amount of wild animals that you see on an adventure like this is just crazy. The amount of deer and other wild animals in these glens is just unreal. Birds of prey making their call in the faraway trees, and the massive mountains of Glendall looming over the top of Glen Clova. This ancient settlement may have actually sat within a forest. You have to imagine it's like thousands potentially of years ago that this was a settlement. Times have changed so much since a place like this was in its prime. Wow, I believe that a lot of the land here was actually landscaped in this area by the original settlers. And I was just thinking, like, if this body of water had maybe originally been created, because there's obviously so much water coming down off the hills, most likely back at that time there was no road like where the current road is. A lot of these little communities were just isolated up here in this wild glen, and I'm sure there's actual proper remains. I can see a massive hare running through the long grass. Oh, it looks like, again, what it looks like, folk, a pure black rabbit. Once it started going up the side of that hill, it looked like a black rabbit. Look how ancient this stone line is here on this hill, leading around this perimeter edge of what must have been an agricultural settlement. It's just so ancient, it's crazy to imagine the people walking about here or spending their days here just trying to farm the land to probably get enough to survive. And then one day they just left this site here. It was just gone and forgotten forever. And look at this, in the corner of this stone outline, you can see this first old building outline here, the complete square. And look, there must have been a couple of doors. One here, and then potentially one over there as well. Wow, this is mad, folks, seeing wee houses like this. Thinking how the land here may have changed since this was somebody's front room, probably before the days of glass. For them looking out their window, they would probably have just like a wooden shutter. And it looks to me like this waterway has been like carved on purpose potentially for like a water supply for the village. But there is like a heap of waterways run within this land. Yeah, this little perimeter wall goes round, and there's almost just wall lines and stuff all over this site. But I'm sure there's a proper building over here that must have been one of the main houses, and it's proper like dug right into the ground. See this area as well, folks. Look at this other perimeter line leading round here. So many, like hundreds of years has passed. You just have to imagine this when it was its grand perimeter wall. And sometimes stones were taken from places like this to build other, like, newer projects in the area as well. That's how there's such a faint scar often of the history. But it's cool with the videos to record it, and often if you come back at a different time of year, you can actually see different layers of the history. I think last time there was no water sitting in that area, because I think it was like summertime or a drier time in the year. This has been quite a big wall leading round this way. There's a high quantity of stones, and then a broken oak tree here. It looks hollow, but I think that hole goes away into it there. Yeah, this is crazy, folks. This kind of leads down and then round to the big pond. But over here is one of the coolest buildings. It's cool that I can do this wee adventure just before sunset. At this time of year I'm obviously limited, because the length of the days is quite short in Scotland. And already the sun's starting to go down and the light's starting to fade. And every day, every week, it gets earlier and earlier. Just now it's 10 to 4 in the afternoon here, and it's pretty much the sun's going down. In another hour it'll be pure darkness in this area. And up in these glens there's just no light, apart from the odd house over the hill. And check this out, here's one of these ancient house perimeters, the big square. And this is one of the finest kept ones here on the hill. There's been more over in each bit here. This has been maybe the main hub of the little community, and then maybe a little farm, more of a farm based house at the far side. But this is also like the same size, I would say, roughly, as the house at the top corner of the settlement. Look at this, it's like somebody's been taking an archaeological sample or trench in this area. Wow, I love to see this, the stonework, and just imagine the people back at the time when they built this. Like, I say it often when I come to sites like this, but just think like how the world was when like this stone was laid here to make this wall. As the person looked around, it must have been just such a different time. Like, they may not even have known what was a few hills over, a few glens over, apart from stories or word of mouth. They would maybe get the odd traveller coming through a place. They would maybe even fear new faces turning up in the area back at that time. And you can think just how this houses must have been. There's no even any chimneys, but often they would have a fire set in a certain position, and the way the roof was, the smoke would go out the roof or out the centre of the roof. But they would definitely have a source of heat away up here in these glens for sure. And the walls have been quite thick, but this is a common thing sometimes with the super like ancient Scottish houses. They're dug into the ground as well. And the roof may have even been made out of wood, but also the mossy heather material could have been on the roof. And it's just crazy to see, like, this one's still pretty deep into the ground, but if you consider like how many hundreds of years has passed, like, it's a credit to how grand it must have originally been and the strength of the original construction of these walls. Yeah, I believe this area is probably most commonly now used by like a gamekeeper or whatever, but it's probably one of the best kept areas of this site. Another detail, you can see how these side stones are actually built off at this direction as well, which shows there may have been like a complex of little buildings or even little sheds in this area. Maybe this was the boy's house here, and then beside the house he had the stable. That's almost how it looks here, and you can kind of picture it. I can hear the noise of the river at the bottom of the hill, and that river's been quite high and quite ferocious this past few weeks. I can see evidence of that down the road. See, this internal wall is non-original here in the site. That'll have been put in probably for a gamekeeper or whatever, maybe stalking deer or out here doing a bit of shooting. But this other external wall here is just incredible to see. And the way it's built and constructed, folks, it's a work of art. The way the stones is put in, some of them's round, some of them's square, and hundreds of years later, they're still standing there. It's just absolutely incredible to see the detail and the craftsmanship that went into this settlement. And nowadays, it's just the home to some sheep. We'll keep this adventure moving though, folks. Let's head on. Because the sun's constantly setting here. It's just gradually getting darker and darker. And here's an interesting detail. There's the outline here of this house. Look, there's another one at this side. So look at this, folks. On the hill, behind this second house that I was mentioning in the land, there's this strange like stone circle, and it almost looks the size of like a burial or whatever. And you really just wouldn't know what had gone on back at these times. It's maybe even where they buried their horse or whatever, but it's kind of on the hill at the back of this little building here. And these houses may have even been from such ancient times as like before Christianity and things had swept over Scotland. Before the days of the Picts and the ancient times like this. Little settlements like this would have still been in the land, because the people always have lived in these wild lands. Sometimes at ancient times they believed they were like wild barbarians, but most likely just hunters out catching enough, and then they would do a small bit of agriculture just to sustain their community, maybe a family settlement. These would have been dotted all over the place. And look, this one's roughly the same size as the other two squares of houses. They're almost so far gone, it's just the outline in the grass sometimes you can see. And the other detail with this one, it's almost like it's had the little bit on the side as well, the same as this one. They're almost like symmetrical houses. And you can just imagine the person here may have potentially had their horse in their stable, or maybe even they had a shed for their cow and their sheep. And each house had the same little kind of deal going on back at that time. And then there's been like this kind of bit, but I'm not sure if originally this outer wall has maybe just continued right along, whereas now it's been dug out for the current farmer in this area. But look, you can follow the perimeter right around here, sometimes using massive chunks of the original stone. Look, it's a red granite stone there on the hill. Natural, vivid red colour. Wow, this is just blowing my mind, folks. Think how long ago a lot of this was built up. All these stones here were put here, carried here from all over this land, just so they could make a bit of a living off the land back then. When you see how boggy and marshy it's been, I think the river's been so high, it's been over in this area. But you could even imagine back at that ancient time, it was maybe the same. The rivers may have been still higher, and that's maybe how their settlement here has been on the shore of that watery area. And you can almost see it, the way the land here is. Often when you look around, you can just see how it was all those years ago, and it becomes clear certain times of the year, an area like this, the reason it was constructed a certain way. And maybe this was a wee bit higher than the inner settlement because they knew the river got high now and again. But I think by the lie of the land, you can often see in these glens how the burns and rivers change course over a period of hundreds of years. They meander and twist and turn. Little communities like this would have also been doing fishing over on the river, and the water, like anywhere on these hills, there's often burns and rivers. And the people like this would also fish. They were probably hunting just like most animals that was available at the time, anything to sustain their way of life. Certain times of year, probably crops and other means of food weren't available, so they would just be eating off the land at those times. Potentially even back at those ancient times, they would have had wolves and things kicking about in these lands. I believe it would have been a lot more forested back then as well. And then look at this, it's another one of these houses we're at the other side of this kind of main street area that I believe's been in this settlement. And there's just a strange little building here. Often I explore so much abandoned history. When I go to a site, it just blows my mind. The things that I see, it's all different time periods and ancient times in history like this, all the way up to the more modern history. There's like Cold War history and stuff in this glen as well. And it just shows how civilization's always been in these wild places. And look at this building's of round construction. I don't know how well it often comes out on the camera, but it's almost like a strange round building. A lot of this vegetation and stuff builds up over the years, and hundreds of years later there could be 2 or 3 meters of vegetation in an area that at one time was obviously totally different. And look, you can see it, the way this has even got grass and stuff on these internal stones. It just shows how nature takes back over. And who even knows like what this little building's been, but just look at the shape of it. It's an original ancient building. And it just kind of, it's maybe been some little shrine or whatever to one of their ancient gods or whatever back at that time. Or it's maybe just had a little chair in it. But it's almost like they've been able to look out over the watery area. Could have even been a little fishing hut, like defended, because if there was wolves kicking about, you would always be paying like special attention to your rear. If you were fishing and you weren't paying attention, a building like this would give you that cover. But it's cool just to throw those theories out and imagine those ancient civilizations and the different strategies they must have had to live within that different land back at those times. And then little things like this are just clues. It's a scar or skeleton of history, telling a little forgotten story. And then there's this little internal waterway, which I believe may have been an original feature here in the land. I'm going to try and get over to this other side, because as I mentioned on the way in, there's another building up here. And actually quite far up the glen here, there's just continuous remains of history. And once you go further up beyond these trees, there's remains of big fields. Well, big for that time. It's like the same sort of stone surrounds as this, but of big proportion. The water in there just looks pure and clear. So this is insane, folks. This is actually watery and soaking wet in this area. But I can see there's an ancient stone line leading through here. And that's the route I'm going to take to stay dry. And I'm just wondering if this was some original stepping stones, which they may have used to cross this. Maybe at one time it was a far more like free-flowing little creek here on the land. Yeah, this hill here has also been part of the settlement. And there is little remains as well within this area. So check this out now, folks. It's getting super dark, but this is one of the most interesting parts of this. I had forgotten about this. It's got this curved end wall here, and then it's kind of curved at that end as well, but it's been quite a thick, strong wall with these 2 small rooms. And then this is an internal wall here. But yeah, this is a proper unusual little building. It's cool to see how they've built them on certain pieces of land, like on these mounds of land and hill. It's just been like above river height, or it's been the perfect kind of area. But the people here have made do with land which is not the most level, because even the fields that are a wee bit further up the glen here, there's like outlines of stones that must have been fields, but they are still quite rough land, quite uneven land. Sometimes it was the people back at these ancient times that learned how to control the water and drain areas for agriculture. And they probably were able to grow different things in this area, with the wet areas and the dry areas and the mad forests and animals that must have been around back at that time. I would say this little hilltop house here at the corner is different to those other ones. It almost looks like it's been more of a defensive little building. Maybe at the corner of this settlement here, they've had like some sort of wee building where somebody would have looked out. But the walls also look a little bit thicker. But I haven't seen any other building on this site with the curved end walls like this. It's mad because some of these buildings you can see easier like this, and you can see how perfect the walls originally must have been, the shape of them. Maybe even buildings like this were to keep animals or whatever in, or to do a particular job, a job that we have no idea that they were even doing. There's probably techniques and skills lost from these ancient times that's just gone nowadays and forgotten. Yeah, but this just blows my mind, folks. It's real history of Scotland, once again documented on the channel, and I do love just to have history from all different time periods. This is like some of the most ancient history that we can see out and about. Old settlements like this where people were thriving and like with a little community, probably living for years happily, and in 1 year there was maybe fear and terror here as their houses got burst down and burnt down, blown apart by maybe an enemy in the land. And then as the years progressed, the land gets taken over by new owners, pieces of history change and disappear in the land as well. I'm going to just head over this way and then back up to the road. So as you can see, folks, by the amount of daylight and the colour of the sky, we've just timed it right for this incredible adventure here. And Glen Clova is one of my favourite Scottish glens. The landscape's just so wild. The hills at the top are just massive. The way the clouds just roll over the top of the mountains and that, it's just incredible to see. And all throughout these lands, there's just these wet areas within the green, rolling little hills here. And I've just been blown away on this adventure. I had forgotten how much incredible little historical nuggets were hidden kind of within that grassy area there. Right, folks, I'm ending this one here. It's been a picture postcard scene in tonight's adventure, and we've documented some history which is ancient and forgotten. But I'm ending it here. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll be back with the next adventure, wherever I end up going.